to strengthen that alliance in all of those areas. And we look at what the administration is interested in, and certainly when we look at the new Trump administration, we know that this president is interested in areas like AI, data, critical minerals, defence, space, cyber, tech, and these are all areas that Australia has capability.
From the Defence and Aerospace Report, this is The Downlink, a podcast about the intersection of space, the space business, and defence. Not just what's over the horizon, but what's happening above it. I'm your host, Laura Winter. Australian space companies and some of that nation's better-known political leaders want to strengthen a US-UK-Australian security alliance by creating closer ties in the space domain. On Tuesday, the Wall Street Journal published a piece penned by Scott Morrison. He's the former Australian Prime Minister. He led his nation from 2018 to 2020, and in that time, his government espoused space-friendly policies. Since the new Albanese government has been installed, there have been deep cuts to major space programs, civil and defense. So in his op-ed, Morrison called on the signatories to the AUKUS Agreement to create a Pillar 3 that would focus specifically on space capabilities. AUKUS is a trilateral security agreement born out of a submarine deal. The United States, the United Kingdom, and Australia signed it in September 2021. It has two pillars, one for conventionally armed nuclear-powered submarines, and the other part, or Pillar 2, covers cyber capabilities, artificial intelligence, quantum technologies, and additional undersea capabilities. There was hope that Pillar 2 would also include space systems, but so far, there's been little evidence of official or budgetary activity to support that expectation. So Morrison's idea of a Pillar 3 is intended to answer that oversight. In the same week as his op-ed, a group of Australian space companies started their tour of the United States. They're looking for government contracts, commercial partners, a location to set up shop here in the United States, and investors to support their hope for expansion into the U.S. market. I met this group in New York at the American Australian Association. In this episode, we're going to hear from two companies and the president of the association, Stephen Marshall. He's well known in Australia because before coming to America, he was the premier of South Australia, where many space companies are located. But before we hear from Stephen Marshall, first, we have Matt Tetlow of Inovor Technologies, followed by Jeremey Hallett of Southern Launch. Hallett is also the chairman of Australia's Space Industry Association. So here's my conversation with Matt Tetlow. Hey, Matt, it's so great for you to make the time to come on the podcast.
Hey, Laura, great to meet you, and thanks for having me.
Now, Matt, you're not from here, so a whole lot of people probably don't really know who you are. So could you please just take a moment and tell us a bit about yourself?
Sure. So my name's Matt Tetlow, and I'm the founder and CEO of Inovor Technologies. Inovor Technologies is a space and defence company based in Lot 14 in Adelaide, South Australia. And we basically do a lot of stuff in the electronic warfare side of things, but then we also build satellites. So we've got 3 spacecraft on orbit, and we're currently building another 3, sort of micro-ESPA size spacecraft, doing things like maritime surveillance, Earth observation, communications, a whole lot of those sorts of things.
Hey, but aren't you also an engineer, not just a founder, not just the head of this company, but I mean, you actually know, you know what you're doing.
Yeah. So I'm actually, I did a PhD in Stuttgart, Germany in spacecraft guidance systems. So I'm an engineer through and through, I'm afraid.
Excellent. I love space nerds. So tell us a little bit more, though, about your company. I mean, it's in Adelaide. It's in, South Australia. It's kind of in this sort of ecosystem of space. But when was your company founded?
So we're about 12 years old. We started mainly in the defence area. And basically, we're a vertically integrated satellite manufacturer, which means that we build all the parts for spacecraft as well. We build star trackers, reaction wheels, batteries, solar chargers, flight computers, all sorts of things like that. And we use all those parts and we build up spacecraft for our customers. So there are 55 people in our company, mainly engineers. And we have about a 10,000 square foot facility with 1,000 square foot clean room, production facilities, all those sorts of things in Adelaide. And that's where we build our satellites. So the 3 that we built, we actually operate them as well, or partially operate, depends on what the customer wants. And then, as I said, we're building 3 more now. And so I guess we've kind of look at bespoke missions at this stage. So looking at things like, Defence have got a particular widget they want flown in space. They come to us and say, can you build a satellite to do that? And we take that on board, integrate it, build the spacecraft, and then get it launched and then operate it as well in some cases.
So would it be right for me to assume, which means that's dangerous, that your main customer is the Ministry of Defence? And if not, who are your customers and where are you launching from?
So all of our launches to date have been out of the United States, but our customers are typically our Department of Defence, the Space Agency. We built the Australian Space Agency's only satellite. The current satellites we're building are one of them is for a Japanese prime called IHI. And one of them is also a kind of government-funded mission. And then the other one is commercial, but I can't talk about that just yet. It'll only be released in a couple of weeks' time. But essentially, we build for commercial and government customers. To date, it's been all government money, but now Australian government money specifically. But now it's sort of moving into, as I said, there's some Japanese funding in there, as well as commercial money in this instance.
So it seems like you're doing pretty well, quite honestly. So I got to ask you, why are you here? And by the way, here, just for the audience, is actually on the 34th floor of a building on 3rd Avenue in New York City, Manhattan. And that's a long way, and at least I'd say 2, if not 3 flights, right? So what you doing here, Matt?
So, yeah, it is a long way to come, I have to say. So what we're doing here is we're bringing out a piece of technology that we developed in Australia, and we're bringing it to the US. We want to stand up a company here and commercialize this technology here. And that's specifically around space domain awareness, or knowing where objects are in space, essentially. So we've developed the technology, the sensor, the algorithms that run on the sensor. We've got like onboard processing of images on the spacecraft, and all that sort of architecture and software and that kind of thing we package up and bring into the US, and we're trying to raise money basically and start off here. There's a very large market in the US. There's a lot of pull in the US. There's a lot of market signals from defence in particular, looking at the type of thing that we do. So it's just the right opportunity. Obviously, the US is also a particularly good friend of Australia, and we've been allies for 100 years sort of thing. So it's just kind of the natural place to come and do this sort of thing. So yeah, that's basically why I'm in the US at the moment.
Are you thinking about actually putting up your own shingle and have some brick and mortar here, or is this something that's going to come from Australia and then is imported into the United States?
No, so I guess the technology has been developed in Australia, so there's been about $10 million spent on it. But bringing it to the US, we're not just bringing a sales office here and saying, we'll just sell this stuff through here. I understand in the US there's very much a made in US philosophy, so we're going to be following that essentially. We'll bring the technology here, we'll raise the money here, we'll build the things here, and it'll be a US company, a US operations, all that kind of thing. So we kind of trying to obviously meet the US's needs as well as our needs kind of thing. So we need funding partners and customers, and the US needs, I think, the technology that we're bringing. So I think, we're going to come here properly in the US, not just a BD engine.
And today we're at an event that is at the American Australian Association. What is that event actually doing? And if I'm not mistaken, you're also going to be on a tour to Washington, D.C. next week, and I think you're going to Texas, maybe Austin. What's the intent? What do you hope to get out of it?
The main thing here we're looking for is partners and investors, like I said. So we are here with an Australian contingent. The South Australian government are supporting this trip, essentially, and they have put together a list of people to meet, both from the partnership and investment perspective. So we essentially have a period here in the US where we're going to meet a whole lot of investors and potential partners and Aerospace Corporation and those sorts of organizations. Then we got a part in the US, again, where we're meeting government and commercial officials. And then where I've never actually been, to Austin and Midland, Texas, where I believe there's a lot of, money and interest in space technology and those sorts of things. So also looking to go and meet a whole lot of people there. So really, it's just an awareness building, broaden our network here in the US. Obviously, in Australia, I know a lot of the network. I know the customers. I know the people. I know the partnerships. Partners, but in the US I don't really have that connection, so this is a great opportunity that the South Australian Government and the American Australian Association are supporting, bringing a group of Australian companies, I guess real companies, into the US to show them around or show them off essentially and see what partnerships we'll build from it.
Matt, well, good luck, and thank you so much for making the time to come on the podcast.
Not a problem. Thank you very much for having me.
Now, if you've been listening to the Downlink's recent episodes, you might remember an interview with the founder of Varda Space Technologies, Delian Asparov. That company's space capsules are used as an in-space manufacturing and testing platform. Varda's third mission carried an Air Force Research Lab payload. When the mission was complete 4 weeks ago, that capsule returned to Earth and landed at Southern Launch's Kaniva Test Range in South Australia. Jeremey Hallett is the chairman of Southern Launch's board of directors and the chairman of Australia's Space Industry Association. Here's our conversation. Hey, Jeremey, it's wonderful to have you on the Downlink podcast.
It's great to be here with you in New York.
So, Jeremey, could you take a moment and introduce yourself to this audience, like what you do, where you do it, why you do it?
Absolutely. Firstly, my full name, Jeremey Hallett, so you all have that to remember. I'm talking to you today in my role as the chairman of Southern Launch, which is an Australian space services company providing a number of different product lines, which I'm keen to get into later. But to introduce myself more fully, the reason I'm in this role is I also run an investment firm called Brindle Bella & Company, and we recently led the latest investment round into Southern Launch, and as part of that process, I joined their board and am now chairman. Alongside that, I'm also the chair of the Space Industry Association of Australia, which is the peak body for space in Australia. So more than happy to answer questions about the whole Australian space sector as well.
So let's get into Southern Launch, because Southern Launch has come up in a prior podcast when I interviewed the folks at Varda Space, right? And we know that Varda's capsules re-enter and land back here on Earth at Southern Launch. So that's kind of weird, a bit of an oxymoron here, right? Launch, but coming back from orbit and landing at Southern Launch. So what is Southern Launch really?
It's a great question, and kind of a bit different to your typical space company, which is technology-centric. We are infrastructure-centric. And I mentioned we have product lines. Those product lines are actually enabled by the infrastructure we have. And it would help if I explain all that quickly. So firstly, we provide orbital launch services. Secondly, we provide suborbital flights and hypersonic flights. Thirdly, we provide re-entries, like the example you mentioned with Varda. And then fourth, we provide defence and aerospace flight testing services. And to do that, we have 3 key facilities currently where our infrastructure is located. We have the Whalers Way Orbital Launch Complex, which is on the southern tip of Australia near a town called Port Lincoln, which is famous for tuna fishing. We conduct orbital and suborbital launches from there south over the Southern Ocean over Antarctica, accessing polar and sun-synchronous orbits. The second site is our Kaniva Test Range, which is in inland South Australia near a small town named Ceduna. That test range is roughly twice the size of Maryland for American listeners, or the size of Switzerland for those on the other side of the Atlantic. We conduct the rest of our activities around suborbital launch, hypersonics, re-entries, and flight testing there. And then the third facility is related to the explosives handling that makes up a lot of that. By explosives, I also mean the propellant as well, which is an important commodity that enables all of our operations. So we operate all that infrastructure, and we achieve all the necessary regulatory and permitting environment for our customers to make use of that infrastructure to conduct their activity.
So today, you've been joined by a lot of your compatriots who are startup companies, and I'm not really sure if I would consider Southern Launch a startup or not. I mean, where does it actually fall into that sort of conceptual sort of thinking?
Yeah, I'd categorize us as a scale-up. In terms of timeframes, we've been around for 7 years now, founded in 2018, and we're now in 2025 for those listening in the future. So about 7 years old, so have a reasonable level of maturity in the business that's been necessary, particularly to navigate that regulatory environment. But in terms of our fundraising journey, definitely in the earlier stages, for example, the next round of funding we would close, we will call a Series A, but that's because we predominantly be funded off our seed financing and also early customer revenue to date. But now we're ready to accelerate with our infrastructure in place and our permitting in place and the demand ready to be met.
Well, seeing that you're the one who brought up investment and that you're going to get into Series A, I mean, for your Series A, how much are you looking for?
That's a good question, because ultimately across our infrastructure footprint, we see a generational investment available reaching close to $2 billion across building up to 9 launch pads at the Whalers Way facility, expanding out the Kaniba test range to make it more like the size of Denmark or Florida for the American listeners, and then runway infrastructure, buildings and propellant handling facilities, etc. So the numbers actually get large as the footprint grows. Where we are at in terms of the current footprint is we have 1 launch pad at the Whalers Way facility. We have a range head with a launch rail at the Kaniba range with a full telemetry system. And so we're expanding that from there. And the next round of funding will go to augmenting that existing infrastructure and progressing detailed design of the next phases of that infrastructure footprint. And so the quantum of money for a Series A would probably be around $30 million for that, with a likely 9-figure round within 12 months, aligned with securing some anchor tenants to make use of the infrastructure.
So as I said, you're here with a lot of your colleagues, and some of them really are startups, right? But you guys are here in the United States for a reason. What is that reason? I mean, it's great to see you all, don't get me wrong, because I can't go off and travel to Australia. So this is a wonderful opportunity for me and for the audience here. But yeah, why are you guys here?
Two things, and both money related, customers and investors. I'll just close out that investor point briefly. To date, our current investor base is made up of infrastructure investors who are trying to get early into what they view as a generational asset. We typically throw around the analogue of spaceports and test range infrastructure to airports. And the infrastructure funds in Australia, whether it's our pension funds or banks like the Macquarie Bank, they are world leaders investing in that sort of hard infrastructure, and they're looking to head to see what is next in there. So we're looking, as our customer base grows more internationally, for investors from friendly countries with a similar mindset looking to invest for the long-term and generational infrastructure. So that's one reason why we're here in the US. The second, on the customer side, seems obvious, but the reason we're seeing traction probably bears delving into. And to be clear, like traditionally, most of our demand has been from Europe. Our early suborbital flights were with a German company. We have contracts to deliver other flights for other European companies. And then also Asia. The first 3 orbital launch attempts undertaken from our facility were with a Taiwanese company. We are making good progress, particularly in the Japanese and the South Korean markets. So that is going well. The engagement with the US has really reached an inflection point in the last 12 months, particularly catalysed by our test range capability, where we get consistent engagement from customers where the rate they can develop their technology, where it's things that fly. So it could be a rocket, could be an aircraft, could be a drone, and the sensors and effectors that interact with them. So it could be a radar system or an electronic warfare payload. The ability to develop that quickly is now currently rate limited by their ability to test and evaluate that properly in analog conditions to where they're going to be used. And that is because the test range infrastructure in the US is got long lead time for access, often many years, and particularly when you're flying things, is constrained by air traffic density, which across the US is very high compared to where we are in Australia, where we jokingly say there maybe is 3 flights a day going over our range. Jokes aside on that one, part of it is enabled by the regulatory environment. So we have been granted, as one of 3 organisations in Australia, the ability to control airspace. The other 2 is the Civil Air Traffic Manager, Air Service Australia. The second is Defence. The third is Southern Launch. And so we are able to arrange with the Civil Air Regulator air traffic control above our range to conduct those activities, meaning it is the place to go for these companies to test their capability.
And so what about actually having, though, a footprint here in the United States? I mean, this may not fit in terms of your infrastructure, right? All of your infrastructure rightly is in Australia. But would you want to have a shingle here in the United States? Is this something that Australian space companies are looking to do? Because there does seem to be a bit of ease if companies that are foreign, actually do open up shop here, right? iSpace is one of those, right? iSpace US. And so they have a contract with Draper, and it is to, payloads, clips going to the moon. So I kind of wonder, hey, I mean, are you guys also looking to open up shop here?
Absolutely. And I would certainly recommend it for any Australian technology company broadly, but particularly in the space sector, as something that is necessary. Talking a bit from personal experience, my previous company that I ran, we did a lot of business here in the US, and we did that from Australia. And our access to market for predominantly defence capability was through industry partners, which is always a good tip to do. But to build those relationships, you got to do that in person. We didn't have offices here in the US. We just spent a lot of time on a plane or in hotels, and that worked well enough. But I now live here in the US, and the revelation I've had is beyond just the obvious that it's good to be proximate to where your customers and your investors might be so you can sit down with them, is that America has such a broad and deep and mature industrial base that it has traditionally thought to always be self-sufficient. And so for totally rational reasons, when it comes to considering capability from Australia or iSpace in Japan, to use your example there as well, we are irrelevant in that context unless we come here and tell people this is what we have and this is where it fits and build that legitimacy and that relevancy. I can't tell you the number of conversations I've had where I explain what Southern Launch can provide, and the customer I'm talking to, it just never occurred to them to think that Australia could provide something like that, which I actually think is totally reasonable given what the US is able to do. And so that's why it's important for Australian companies to get here, more than just flying over here a few times a year, having someone on the ground, talking to those customers all the time, reminding them what Australia can do in terms of technology and in terms of our geographic advantage is important for what the US is trying to achieve.
Jeremey, thank you so much for your time.
It's my absolute pleasure. Look forward to next time.
And now, finally, this episode's headliner interview with Stephen Marshall. Now, before becoming the president of the American Australian Association in January, he was South Australia's 46th premier. And what's kind of interesting here is that when he led the state of South Australia, he also took on the state's space and defense ministerial portfolio. Here's our conversation. Hello, Stephen. It's a real honor to have you on the Downlink podcast.
Well, it's absolutely fantastic to join you today. Laura, this is my first time on the Downlink podcast. I'm an avid fan. It's such a great resource, and it's wonderful to be with you today.
I really do not pay you enough. I'm sure I don't. We're going to have to talk about this after this recording. So now, in my introduction to this week's podcast, I've already introduced you a wee bit, the fact that you recently served the state of South Australia as its premier, and also that since January of this year, you are the president of the American Australian Association. But I got to ask, how did a guy who comes from a family of furniture manufacturers get interested in space? And I have a hunch that this interest started before you became premier. And it should also be said that when you led South Australia, you were at the very same time the state's Minister for Defense and Space Industries, which is a lot to get after. But as premier, you wanted to lead that effort as well. So why? Why space? Why defense? Why are you in this still? What's What's driving you, Stephen?
Well, look, South Australia has a wonderful history in the space sector. In fact, Australia was only the third country in the world to build, design, and launch its own satellite, the RESAT, which was launched. The RESAT stands for Weapons Research Establishment Satellite, November 1967. Older than I am. So Australia had a great place in the global space sector then. And then it had this 50-year hiatus where it wasn't too involved at all. So when I became a politician, I was looking at why is this? And I enlisted the help of Andy Thomas, who was Australia's first astronaut. He was over in Houston, Texas. I visited him. He got me super excited. And when I got back, I made it my mission to do everything I could to impress upon the federal Australian government that we should have a space agency, because we were the only OECD country without a space agency. And I thought this doesn't seem right for a country and my state, which had a proud history.
And a proud history associated with space as well. I mean, people don't really realize that all of the U.S.'s, major space operations have involved Australia as well.
Absolutely. We are geographically in exactly the right space. So I thought we had a great history and we had a great opportunity. And so I did what I could to get the nation and, of course, my own state enthused about the opportunities.
And like what though? I mean, what down there, really just sort of warms your heart? Because there are a lot of things that are going on in South Australia, honestly, right?
Yeah,
is there one thing that in particular, is it the fact that you have basically a spaceport there, but there are also other industries, right?
Number one thing that we've got now is the Australian Space Agency. So again, before IAC came to Australia, to Adelaide in 2017, there was no space agency in Australia. And so we were really left out, quite frankly. When Senator Simon Birmingham announced that we would have a space agency in Australia at the IAC, there was a cheer that went up right across the entire conference. Finally, Australia was going to be playing its role in the global space industry. And now, of course, in South Australia, we have the headquarters of the Australian Space Agency and Mission Control and the Space Discovery Centre. We've also got the SmartSat Cooperative Research Centre, which is the largest space-related research program in the history of Australia, all based in Adelaide. And around that sits a growing ecosystem, not just for South Australia, but for the nation. We have more than 100 companies and organisations in the Space Agency from really, quite frankly, a standing start 6 or 7 years ago.
Yeah, sounds like a really interesting deep tech sort of corridor going on there. So you've got this event this week that is kicking off a U.S. tour featuring Australian space companies in 3 different cities, at least the ones that I know of. That would be New York, Washington, D.C., Austin. These companies are looking for investors and partnerships. But why now? And just before you answer, I'd like to give a little bit of context here, right? Because you've got to admit that the current national government has in the past few years wielded a blunt instrument and cut monies from space-related budgets and initiatives and canceled contracts, right? This past November, the Albanese government canceled Australia's largest space program ever, and that was going to be a sovereign satellite communications program with the oddest of names, JP 9012. It was worth $5.3 billion US dollars and a contract with Lockheed Martin. And 2 years ago, Australia's first national space mission, which was called the National Space Mission for Earth Observation, or NSMEO. And some people say NSMEO. It also got the axe, though, right? And that's just the big stuff. Space Force also took a hit in 2023. So yeah, what are you guys doing now here in the United States? What's the program? What's the program called? Who's involved? What's the goal?
Okay, well, look, there are a lot of really good things that are happening in Australia. You have listed some of the challenges, but the Albanese
It's only because a lot of people care, honestly.
Look, the Albanese government has just been re-elected. We have a brand new minister, Senator Tim Ayres. He's from New South Wales, our most populated state. He's a huge space enthusiast, and I'm very enthusiastic about the government really engaging with the space opportunity. And that is a big opportunity. It's a growing opportunity. We see here in the US a government which is very focused on the space opportunities. And you asked the question, why are we at the American Australian Association having this delegation come from Australia at this point in time? Well, I'll tell you, it's a great time for South Australian and Australian companies to get over here because of the regulatory unlock, which went through Congress last year. Before that, it was very difficult for innovators in Australia to tap into the opportunities within the government sector over here in the US. This regulatory unlock in terms of ITAR, foreign military sales, has created an almost license-free arrangement, which really allows defence and dual-use innovations in Australia to access the largest global market, the US. It also, importantly, makes it far more attractive for US-based capital to invest in the Australian defence and dual-use sector, because now those opportunities can not just sell to the Australian government or the Australian ecosystem, which is pretty small, but they can now come back and sell into the US. That's a big opportunity, and that is exactly why now, because this only happened late last year, October, November last year through Congress. There is now a massive opportunity, and it's why a lot of Australian companies are beating a path to the US, and it's why the US VC sector is very, very interested in Australian space.
Do you think that some of these Australian companies will have to create a footprint here, though? Are they going to start, hanging up shingles here and trying to become part of our ecosystem?
Absolutely, and they already are. So we're seeing now the first of the Australian companies hang up their shingle, as you put it, over here in the US. It starts with sales because this is the largest market in the world. But Australia is increasingly integrating with the US. We've seen Varda now with its extraordinarily exciting pharma manufacturing in low Earth orbit, in microgravity. I mean, I can't believe it, quite frankly, what they're doing, but they are launching from Vandenberg, Recovery in Australia, Kaniba in South Australia. So I think from a recovery perspective, we are an extraordinarily attractive place. And within the overall ecosystem, launch and recovery is strong in Australia, a good regulatory environment, a good geography. And of course, now with this license-free arrangement, it makes it so much simpler.
Speaking of that, I mean, one of the things that I've been really interested in insofar as Australia, its location on the planet, is launch. And you just mentioned that, right? And we understand that if you launch from Australia, you essentially don't have to use as much fuel because you're right near the equator, which means you get that extra kick of energy from the rotation of the Earth. So I'm wondering, have there been any nibbles on that? Because if, insofar as I know, and please correct me if I'm wrong, because I really could be, because we're talking about regulations and regulations are confusing. Are there any nibbles from U.S. companies wanting to launch from Australia and get that kick to take advantage of Australia's geographic location?
It is a great location because of its geography. You talk about equatorial launch, but also polar launch is a very logical opportunity from Australia. So I think there's lots of opportunities. We've got one company that is coming over to the summit called Southern Launch. They have 2 licensed sites. They have had excellent recovery work already with Varda. I think 3 recoveries so far this year. And also they've had space capable launch, if that makes sense. So they didn't go into space. They might have changed, by the way. It's moving so quickly. I almost feel scared to make these pronouncements because last time I looked, they'd had a space-capable launch. It was successful. But, of course, this sector is just changing. It's morphing. It's moving. And that's really exciting about that opportunity. So, yes, historically, we've had launch from Australia, Woomera. We've had recovery We had JAXA's Hayabusa 2 coming back into the Woomera prohibited area in South Australia only back in 2021, I think it was. And now, of course, commercial recovery through VADA. There are so many opportunities, but it's not just the launch and recovery opportunities. It's all of those other aspects of the broader space ecosystem, whether it be Earth observation, whether it be Internet of Things. There's one company which last year raised more than $100 million in its Series C, Fleet Space, which does have an office here in the US, which is really helping the mining sector accelerate its exploration work. I mean, this was unheard of, going back just months. Now it is the new norm. If you want to accelerate your geological discoveries, you're using space, and Fleet Space is right there. As I said, they've raised more than $100 million in their Series C. And again, from a standing start just a few years back.
Yeah, that is amazing for sure. But let's get to something that's also, the other part of that portfolio that I alluded to earlier, right? Not just the premiership, which was huge, but that portfolio, the ministerial position was not just space; it also included defense, right?
Yeah.
So, what's the defense angle, right? I mean, we've got AUKUS Pillar 2, we've got the Technology Safeguards Agreement, we've got a focus on space situational awareness and discussions on that, and they have been going on, from administration to administration. So there's lots of love between the United States and Australians on this point. But what's the defense angle you think for this particular visit with this particular group of Australian space companies?
Yeah, well, a few moments ago, you talked about the postponement of JP 9102, which was a big program. But the reality is there is still enormous opportunity in the defence sector allied to space. So if you go back even 4 or 5 years ago, we had land, sea, air. Actually, that's changed because we have 2 new defence domains in Australia. Just like you have over here in the US, we have space and we have cyber. These are the new domains. These are the new areas where the US does continue to have supremacy, no doubts about it, but they're looking to work cooperatively. They're looking to innovate. They're looking to innovate with allies, and there is no greater ally to the US than Australia. And of course, only in recent years, September 2021, we signed the AUKUS Agreement between the US, the UK, and Australia. So President Biden, we had Boris Johnson over in the UK, and of course Scott Morrison in Australia. Those 3 people signed the AUKUS Agreement. And there are so many opportunities for us to work across those 3 countries and more broadly with some other countries as well around that defence opportunity. And I think that we're going to see this becoming more and more important, more and more prevalent.
So just to wrap things up, you're now here in the United States. Is that correct?
Absolutely. I moved here on January the 4th. I love this organisation. It's an incredible mission to strengthen the alliance between the US and Australia. We were established back in 1948. And one of those critical areas of the alliance going forward is space. It's no longer the new frontier. It's something which we are actively engaged with, and I couldn't be more excited.
And so for you in your position here in the United States, what's your goal? What do you want to see? Where do you want this to be at, say, in 5 years' time?
Well, our founder, Sir Keith Murdoch, said that Australia would always be better off economically and from a national security perspective if America was our strong ally. And that's our goal. We're a strategic organisation. We're not a business chamber. We are really focused on strengthening the alliance. We use every lever we can, whether that be cultural, whether it be diplomatic, whether it be from a business perspective, whether it be philanthropic. We run a huge philanthropic program here at the American Australian Association, and increasingly doing more around graduate education in the space area, which we're very excited about. But what gets me out of bed every day is working with our friends in America to strengthen that alliance in all of those areas. And we look at what the administration is interested in, and certainly when we look at the new Trump administration, We know that this president is interested in areas like AI, data, critical minerals, defence, space, cyber, tech, and these are all areas that Australia has capability. These are all areas that we want to partner. This is a very good time for Australia to be right here in the US, and we're super excited about this delegation which is on its way.
Stephen, thank you so much for making the time to come on the Downlink podcast.
Laura, it's been an absolute pleasure, and I hope you and your listeners enjoy not only this session, but future sessions with other people from Australia.
Oh, well, if you're going to put that out there, you know I am going to have to take you up on that offer for sure. You be careful, friend. All right. See you soon. Thank you. That's it for this week. For your daily dose of award-winning defense coverage, listen to the Defense and Aerospace Report with Vago Muradian. And for the maritime domain, listen to Cavis Ships with Chris Cavis and Chris Cervello. And get your air domain news and analysis from the Air Power Podcast with JJ Gertler and Vago Muradian. I'm Laura Winter. Thank you for listening.